Ready? Namaste and good evening, everyone. Wish you all a very happy Janmashtami and Gopal Gala. In our last episode, we met with our respected speaker, Bhante ji, uh, who is a renowned person in Buddhism. He gave us a glimpse of Buddhism around the world. He encouraged us to travel to different countries, visit different heritage monuments, and observe and so try to understand that how this really the stories work. So it is basically he wanted to tell that when you visit the sites, you actually get the experience of the divine powers that are present on those sites. And he believes that these heritage sites have more information to share than any other texts that are found in our countries. But often we have this question that how are these heritage sites found? Who finds them? Who discovers them? Or how are they preserved or conserved? How do we get to know the history behind them? Or which era do they belong to? And the most importantly, how do we visit them? And when we are visiting them, how do we learn from them? So, to answer all these questions, we have with us today a renowned archaeologist, Dr. Prabodh Shirvarkar from Pune. Please welcome Dr. Prabodh. Hello, Prabodh, sir.
Hello, thank you very much. Namaskar.
Namaste. So, Mr. Prabodh is a assistant professor at Deccan College, Pune. He also teaches archaeology at the Institute of Archaeology at Archaeological Survey of India. He teaches at Tilak Maharashtra Vidyapit and Mumbai University as well. He has been the project director for various excavations carried out at Chiran in Bihar and Kotada Bardli in Gujarat over the past few decades. He has published across several journals and papers, and he continues to be one of the prominent speakers of Harappan civilization and has conducted several knowledge sessions about the topic across the country. So let us join him in exploration of the past and its connection to our present. Please welcome Prabodh sir.
So thanks a lot again, once again, thankful to Dipti, then thankful to uh,
Aniket.
Prayag and Aniket for giving me this opportunity. And I'm really glad that actually, you people are taking up such projects so we can reach to people. Otherwise,
Yes.
there is always a barrier between archaeologists and the common people. So at least now that barrier is somewhere cracking and we are able to reach to people. So that is
Yes.
a good beginning, in fact.
Thank you. Thank you. So,
Thank you.
Prabodh, sir, we would like to ask you that how did you choose to go in this field of study, and which courses did you do, and how did you started your career in this?
See, like my family background plays a very important role in selecting this particular field for me
Okay.
because my grandfather, he was basically a kirtankar. So he was basically, going into temples and preaching and all that. So there was somewhere he was related with the vocabulary. Then my father, he was a very well-known Marathi writer, Suhas Shirvalkar. So automatically, because of that, that oratory skills were developed into the writing skills. And then obviously, because of his writing styles and all that, so there was some, influence on me right from the beginning of regarding, the history and some sort of a suspicious activities or some sort of, a detective sort of things.
Right.
So slowly, because of this family background, I got attracted towards history.
Okay.
So for that, I did my BA in history from Ferguson College. But then while doing history, I realized that this is not something which I want to do. History is something which is more related, looking at the documentary forms or looking at the inscriptions or looking at the textual data and all that, or the foreign accounts and all that. So that was not something which was, making me interested in the field. So what was making me interested was, in fact, looking at the past where everything is new. So there is a possibility that where you need to talk with them and probably you need to identify or you need to, have some sort of a conversation which is completely mute conversation. And that was something which really attracted me. And
Okay.
that this is how I selected it, rather than going into history, I went into archaeology. And then I did my MA from Deccan College, my PhD from Deccan College, and then I joined the same institute as an assistant professor. So this is how I started.
Okay. So over the years, your work, your research has been published as well as credited at international levels. So can you tell us more about it? Which papers have you written and about the studies have you done?
Yeah, see, like when I started doing work, so fortunately that was the time like when mostly the foreign universities started getting interest into India. So there were a lot of collaborations from different universities. So the first, as a student, I worked on the site called Gnome, which is in Rajasthan. So that was in collaboration with Pennsylvania University. And that was the first opportunity. Like, see what happens, we are trained in one particular manner, and our understanding is like the linear sort of model which we try to understand our culture or the development. So everything we look into one particular framework. But when you work with the foreigners, then you get a lot of new ideas to develop yourself, because they are not bound by our cultural norms, they are not bound by our cultural the values. So they are completely different from that. So they can think in a various ways when they are looking at a different material. But normally with people like us, what happens, like we have some family background, some cultural background. So we try to be very stereotype in our understanding and analyzing the material. So
Right.
there, for the first time, I realized that no, we need to go away from those sort of the brackets what we have if we want to survive on the international platform. Otherwise, the survival is very difficult. We cannot go up to the mark of international level, and we cannot get recognition in the on the international level. So for that, it is not only like looking at the text. So that is something which is like like that heritage we have. But then again, we need to look at the cultural material, and then we need to prove using the scientific equipments, using the scientific philosophy, that whether that text is of importance or it is saying something, and where what we are getting actually is different or not. So there should be a combination of what we have as a heritage, like inscriptions or the text and everything. But at the same time, we should have a scientific temper to look at the material. And we should be able to ready that. If we don't find that, it's fine. Okay, it's not there. So it is
Right.
not hard and fast that it should be there. It might happen that it might not be there. So we should be ready to accept that fact.
Right.
So this is how I started learning slowly, and fortunately, like I always say, like if you have a good guru, if you have a good people around you, you succeed. So fortunately, I got a very helpful PhD guide, Professor Vasant Shinde, who is one of the excavator who excavated Rakhi Gadi and has done the DNA analysis and all that. So he was
Wow.
my PhD guide. So right from the beginning, I got a blessings from people like him, or like M.K. Dhaulikar, who was a Padma Shri, who excavated a site like Inamgaon in Maharashtra, and he has worked extensively on Kailash. He has worked extensively on Ajanta. So I got his guidance. Then our Dr. Deglurkar sir, so I got his guidance, and then all my friends, because from everyone I could learn. Like there is a simple thing. Like now you people are architect, right? So when we do the drawings on site, like we get the structures, so we need to draw them. So now what happens if I don't know architectural drawing, if I am not from the architectural background, what I will do is basically I try to do the sketches, but those
Yeah.
are not according to the measurement. So in archaeology, everything what we do, right from plotting the trenches to the drawing, everything has to be according to the architectural drawing. That is like the 90-degree angle has to be there, exact measurements, scale, reduction of scale. So I could learn that everything from my friends in the drawing section. They taught me. So
Right.
slowly I could, each and every aspect or different aspect of archaeology I tried to learn from the scratch, because I was coming from a BA background. It was very difficult for me to understand science. So I need to take some help from the scientific discipline, asking my friends or the professors, and getting some help from them. So slowly we developed ourselves. And then in that process, definitely, like we excavated many sites in different parts of India. So I was earlier as a student of PhD, MA, I was a part of those projects. I was camp in charge. I was, like that I started. And now slowly I started excavating my own sites. Now I write my own excavation reports and everything. So this is a very, slow beginning for me. So now almost like after 20 years, I could be, what I am right now at least.
Right. Absolutely. That was like a wonderful journey. Prabodh, it is always we think that archaeology is excavation, but I'm sure that it is more beyond just the excavation and finding skeletons. So, can you let us know that what exactly is archaeology and what are the different departments of archaeology and what all things can get included in that?
See, archaeology is like, like when we look at the Indian education system, so we have divided anthropology separately and archaeology separately. But if you go into the Western countries, so archaeology is a branch of anthropology. So they have divided anthropology into applied anthropology, cultural anthropology, linguistic anthropology, and archaeology. So these are the sub-disciplines of anthropology. But because we are following the UK standards right from the beginning, so we have kept these two disciplines as separate disciplines. But actually they are merged together, because when we excavate, so excavation is a procedure, right? Like putting the trenches, excavating it very carefully, retrieving the cultural material. But then retrieving is not enough. We have to go to the next level where we need to understand the human. We need to understand the human mind. We need to understand the culture, cultural processes. So these are all the questions which are anthropological questions. So when we deal with archaeology, so we have various sub-disciplines, like we have cultural anthropology or biological anthropology or linguistic anthropology. At the same time, because we are working with the different science background or with different scientific technologies, so we have to take the help of chemistry, we have to take the help of zoology, botany, then we have to take the help of the earth sciences, like particularly the people who are working with the earthquakes or the volcano eruptions, then the environmental
Right.
people, then the geoarchaeologists, then the geologists. So it's like, see, excavation, maybe it's a job of archaeologists, but analyzing that is not job only of archaeologists, but it is basically a multidisciplinary science. So we need to take into consideration different fields when we are doing that. So one of that is basically like underwater archaeology, or
Yeah.
maybe now in India it is becoming very upcoming field, like what we are calling as a cultural heritage management, or looking
Yeah.
at the conservation and preservation policies. So now that is a something like a very newborn upcoming field in India particularly. So archaeology includes everything where there is a human, and what are you doing with anything, so that is included in archaeology.
Right. So it is rightly said that it is actually digging out the past and connecting to our present and
Yes,
understanding what was the whole life during
yes,
that time. So as you said, it is not just one particular thing about
no,
finding the ceramics and the pots, but
no.
actually understanding the entire life system of what they ate, how they lived their life, how
Right.
they did the hunting and everything.
Right, and then this gives us an idea of like how the things developed.
Right.
Like every aspect what we see today has to have some development. Like forget after, like like once you have a green revolution, industrial revolution, and all that, or the IT industries coming up, so the scenario is changing very fast.
Hmm.
Like whatever the technology you have, that gets completely absolute even after 5 years or 2 years, and you have to adapt to the new technology. But that is not happening pre some sort of like 1960. So you can see like almost the similar type of life we continued for hundreds of years. Even
Yes.
our agriculture system was not changed, our food habits were not changed. So the kind of food now what we are eating because of the globalization, that is completely different. But
Right.
what our parents or the grandparents they ate, so that was almost a common type of food which almost every population in each region has done.
Right.
So, but then there is a drastic change. What is happening in the society? So this gives us a lot of clue. Like when we are looking at the the dietary patterns, looking at the cropping patterns. So that gives us a lot of guidelines when we talk about the past. Because then we don't consider the present day, like particularly 1960s onward sort of data. We don't consider for that, because that has changed complete face of the earth. For like the canal system started, you started getting the the waters. So now if you look at the old maps, British period maps, so like those are done in 1862 or 1892. So look at those maps and you will find that the Rajasthan is completely vacant. There is very less population in the areas like the Ganganagar or Suratgarh and all that. But now that is the area which is producing more wheat than Haryana. So that is
Right.
because of what they have done, that Ganga branch canal system and all those Indira Nair and everything. So because of that, now we are getting more wheat into that area. But that was not the area where Harappans or the earlier people, they never cultivated that. They had a different food habits. So we need to look into that, how the society, how the agricultural system and everything keeps changing. So this is how we try to, track the development, track the changes, and then we try to learn from that, like where we went wrong. And the famous saying is that one of the stupidest thing what we have done in the history of human mankind is beginning of agriculture. If we would have not done the agriculture, would have never been settled. We would have been very happy roaming around and being hunter gatherers.
Wow. Right. Yes. And I think as humans, if we look at a present state, we are still using a lot of techniques which our ancestors or even the prehistoric people were using. So probably they were using stone techniques, they were using metals, and we still, when we call ourselves as the modern humans and the digital era, but we cannot live without them. We are so dependent on certain techniques or instruments which are still made from stone or say metals. And for hunting skills, if we look, then say even the bow and arrow or the swords or even the modern techniques or the instruments are being derived from what we have been finding out from the prehistoric era. And I think that is how the entire connection lives about.
Yes, definitely. See, like what you talked about, like agriculture, or looking at the some sort of a warfare equipments, or looking at even the clothing what we are
Yeah,
wearing. Like we
yeah,
call it as like the pure cotton and all that. So from where it has come? It is not
yes,
an introduction of last 500 years or 600 years. So like when we look at the earliest references, or we look at the earliest archaeological references. So what we see that during the time of Harappan civilization. So people started using cotton clothes. They were having silk. So there was a proper garment industry was there during the
yes,
Harappan times. So we can see that. Then the agriculture. So again, Harappans were the first people, in fact, who introduced double cropping system. So that is what we called as a Kharif and Rabi, right?
yeah,
So this double cropping system was introduced by Harappans. So that's why when we talk about particularly, like, see, like when I say Harappan, so I always talk about United India. That is basically, it includes Pakistan as well, because after 1947 maybe these two countries are different, but we share a common heritage, we share a common ancestry, and we share a common sort of archaeological culture as well. So as a culture wise, it's a common simple, like a same unit what we are. So
right,
looking at that, so the first people who started agriculture, domestication of plants, like what we eat, wheat or barley. So the first domestication of these plants, that has happened at the site of Mehergarh around
yeah,
7500 BC.
yes,
Then even the domestication of animals like sheep, goat, so they are domesticated at Mehergarh. Then there is another pocket where the domestication has happened, that is in the Gujarat, in the Saurashtra region, where the cattle were domesticated separately. So there are various different pockets where this domestication started, and from there is a boost to agriculture. From agriculture, there is a boost to the surplus. When there is a surplus, then there is a boost to the craft activity. Okay, because these are the full-time craftsmen. So if the
right,
potter is manufacturing pottery throughout the day, throughout his lifetime, so there needs to be someone who is supporting the family. So that is coming from the surplus, right? So again, when you have a full-time craft activity, that means there is a market which has a demand. So that's why the potter is manufacturing such a beautiful pottery. So this is all interlinked, and these developments keeps going on. And from one technology, there is a development of another technology. So like from the like you said that stone tool technology. So from stone tool technology, then we go into the copper technology. Then copper technology gives rise to the iron technology. Similarly, when you look at now the glass is such a the common material now we use everywhere. But then how that glass technology started, how people realized that silica has got certain amount of characters which we can utilize for manufacturing of the objects. So now this, again, the Harappans were the first one to understand that if you heat this silica, so it gives you some sort of a luster or a glaze. So they utilized that, but they never created a glass out of that. What they did, there is something called as a faience. So it's a faience is a material, and for the glazing they use silica. So from this faience technology, glass technology develops. So this is how we can see, like, development of technology coming up and then coming up to the present time. Then even the architecture wise, now everything will look at, like, the 90-degree angle. There should be plumb bob. There should be, the spirit level should be there, line level should be there, and all that. So now these sort of technology, obviously, like, these were not there. But what they utilize is I will give a very small example that how our traditional knowledge system is a very important aspect in Indian culture, and we have forgotten that that is something very unfortunate. Okay, so there was this very famous archaeologist Leonard Woolley, and he was working in the area. And then what happened? He found the ruins of temples. So it was all scattered. People took away all the stones, and nothing was left. Only here and there some bits of stones were left. And he was very adamant that he wanted to excavate that site. And the people were that, okay, but you are not going to get anything because everything is gone. So what you will do? But he was like, no, I want to excavate and I will excavate. He excavated that site. He didn't find anything because everything was gone. Then one day he was roaming in the village, and then what he saw, like, in the excavation, he got a red mark on the stones at a very regular height. Okay, so he was very confused. Why every stone has got a red mark on the stone? So when he was roaming around in the village, so he found that the people who were constructing houses. So this is a story which is about somewhere around 1900 or late 1800 story. So and Leonardo Woolley is one of the greatest archaeologists, in fact, who excavated sites like Ur and all that. So so he looked at the new modern ways of doing construction, and what he realized, basically, to make the levels, to make the foundation walls straight enough, they use a thread which is dipped in the red color. They make the marking at exact height, and accordingly they place the stone for the construction. So that was one clue, and he reconstructed the whole temple using that, because he was getting the red mark on the stones. So he calculated the height, and similarly he started reconstructing the whole temple, and he could reconstruct the complete one. So now this is how he could do that. It is because of the traditional knowledge system which is still there, and that is something which is there in India in every village community. Like, maybe in the city limits, that is gone out of our brain. Like, we are not following those sort of things because we consider that that is something which is, like, that should not be followed. That is, like, the villages way of doing it, not the urban way of doing it. Okay, but these traditional knowledge systems are very important to understand archaeology, because they are very helpful. Not only the traditional knowledge system, but apart from that, what sort of the legends we have, traditions we have, oral traditions. So those are very important to understand, because unfortunately now what is happening, all these traditions are dying out very fast, because now the old generation is there in the villages, but the next generation, they have shifted out from the villages. So now they are not, they're not in the touch of those sort of legends and traditions. And again, for them, because now they are urbanized, for them this is something which is, the business of old people. Like, this is all a business of, like, doesn't matter whether I know it or no. It doesn't make any difference for me. So that's why now we are losing out on one of the most important heritage what we have in India. That is basically how we define it: intangible and tangible. So, like, the built heritage we are looking after, but then this particular heritage, so we are losing out on that. So that is something which is very important. We need to document.
Right. And Prabodh, you were talking about how this metals and glass came up, and I think it is from that technology, the jewelry and etc. got derived, I guess, and that is how people started ornamenting themselves and creating a lot of different some the artifacts which can decorate themselves. So, and I think that is still prevalent. Like people are still wanting to discover something new, but still using those old metals like gold and silver and so many other metals where we want to ornament ourselves. So, can you give us some examples about that? And I think you have also traveled and know sort of places in Gujarat where people still continue to make such jewelry from with their ancient technology. So, can you tell something about that?
See, there are two fabulous examples, living traditions, what we have. So the first is from the greater run of Kutch. So that is from the village called Khavda. So
Okay.
there is a family now, almost like all the families of the Potter class, they have like shifted to some other business. So there are very less families left in that village, but they are still doing the pottery manufacturing exactly in the similar way the way Harappans manufactured pottery. So including their paintings, including the shapes, everything is very similar with the Harappan. So that is what we say, like basically the legacy is continuing in that part of Harappan tradition. Then second example is from the Khambat region. So in Khambat region, there is one artist. His name is Anwar Hussain. So this Anwar Hussain, he basically manufactures beads. So these beads are manufactured out of semi-precious stones, like what we call as a carnelian beads or the lapis lazuli or agate. So he basically used stone material for manufacturing of these beads. And his technology, what he is using, is exactly similar technology like the Harappans. It is ancient technology. He doesn't use any sort of a machine for the production of beads. All the beads are handmade, and even for the chipping and final polishing and everything he uses buffalo horn. So he manufactures all the beads using horn, and he's still doing that. And even the drill which is made, so he has got different like drills now. He has a diamond drill and different sort of drills. But then if you go and tell him that, or ask him like, okay, no, we want to have a bead with the traditional technology, so he does that with the traditional technology without using diamond drill. So he uses the regular drill and he makes the hole. And the largest bead which he has made, which is a handmade, so that is somewhere around 12 centimeter long. So that's the
Wow.
handmade bead which he has manufactured. And his the style of manufacturing is exactly similar to Harappan style of beads what we get in the excavation. So now, and he is basically president. He has got a president award even for his work. His father was doing the same business. His grandfather was doing the same business. So it's a generation to generation they are doing the same business. So so like that in the pockets we do have some sort of the ancient craft which is still surviving. The only
Right.
thing is that we need to give boost to these people so they can
Right.
survive and they can continue with that. Otherwise
Yeah.
maybe one or two more generation they will sustain, and after that they will just stop making that and they will go into
Absolutely.
different companies, or they will start working as a labor in some company because they are getting the assured pay every month. So
Yeah.
slowly this is the dying out business what we can see.
Right. Also, can you just repeat that? What are the beads called as, or from what material they are made?
So the material like carnelian, then there is a material called lapis lazuli, then there is a material called agate.
Okay.
Then yeah, so there are different types of these are all semi-precious stones. So you
Right.
get them from different parts of India, and he manufactures those beads.
Okay. Wow. So I
And
think that technique was so perfect that even after all these years, and when we say that we are coming up with new techniques and we are finding new technologies, and we can still go back all these years or
yes,
thousands of years, and we can still use that technique.
yes,
And
definitely, and like it was more environmental friendly, it was more
right,
economical, and it was like more of a family business, so many people used to come together, so there was a communication. So
right.
at different levels it was much better technology than what we are utilizing.
So are these beads actually used as ornaments and made
Yes,
for jewelry?
yes. Even in the Harappan times they were like used as a jewelry, and
Right.
even today they are used as a jewelry.
Yes. In fact, a lot of artifacts or sculptures or what we found in our excavations, I think they give a lot of idea about what jewelry, what textiles, even the design patterns, what we are used. Even in one of the sculptures, I saw that they were actually wearing something very similar to anarkali and pajama, and
Yeah,
it had a lot of intricate designing on it. So we know that even all those thousands of year back, people were so interested into designing. So we say that we are more fashionable, but I think they
yeah,
were equally fashionable, and they had all this knowledge about how designs can be derived and actually used on our clothes.
yeah, definitely. And their art was more, maybe in modern sense it was a primitive art, but then it was more luxurious art, and there was
Yes,
a lot of the art expression was much better than our art expression.
right. And it
So
was pure form, like it
yes,
was actually inspired by the nature's elements which were
yes,
found there. Yeah,
yes. It was inspired by nature, as well as it was, the instinctive form. It was not a combination of something which is a copy.
right,
Like it was a piece of original artwork what they did.
right,
So it was like basically the artist's imagination. And this is how, like, like in the modern times, we call it as a behavioral archaeology, or, the understanding the cognition. So, like, suppose I am making a pot, or I am making some painting on the pot. So, what was the understanding, or what was the thinking of that potter behind painting certain motifs? So, how he executed that? Like whether it was a free hand, if it was a free hand, and whether it was actual a free hand, or he used certain type of a stencil for doing that, because so many, repetitive paintings are coming and there is no error of placing. So if they are doing with such a, sort of control, then probably they were using stencils in the painting. But then you
right.
get variety of animals, so that basically shows the local, the animals which are available, which that person has seen, or the plants which are there. And suppose if something we get which is not a local product, like suppose a palm tree. Now, if we are getting a palm tree, say in Haryana, or say in MP, so getting a palm tree in that area is something which is unnatural. So in that case, we have to think that, okay, that palm tree motif, if that is coming on the pottery, whether that pottery is an export from some other source, or basically it is basically like maybe a trader went there, he actually saw that palm tree, he came back, he gave an idea to the potter that, okay, I have seen this type of a plant, and then the potter made his own, sort of imagination and painted
Imagination.
it on the pot. Okay, so
Right,
there are multiple ways of looking at archaeological record, and we have to think from different perspective.
right. And I think even during those times, the trade route had come up, and then people might have migrated from there or got inspired from different countries, and from there they must have got a lot of ideas as well.
Yeah, definitely. See, like that's why we always say that even if the population is not migrating, but the ideas has got wings. Ideas
Right.
can travel. They have wings.
Yes.
Okay, so not necessarily that person from Mesopotamia has to come to, Harappan site, but there might be the trader who is going on and off and doing and carrying out the work. So he might just get some as a souvenir back to his town, and he can show that, oh, look at this, I got this from Ur, and this is one of the, the finest sort of artifacts what you get there, and this is very expensive. And then the local craftsman says that, oh, okay, I can make that, I can duplicate that, and he starts manufacturing. But then there is a difference in the material, and there is a
Yeah.
difference basically in the understanding of that product, because the origin is somewhere else, and then the potter is duplicating that. So the intensity understanding is different, so automatically the shape will be similar, but there will be intuition of local identity in that. So he may
Absolutely.
not exactly execute the same motifs or paintings on that, but he will introduce his own local style into that. And there we can see
Yes.
the fusion of, the two different parts.
Yes. Absolutely. And Prabodh, we are talking so much about Harappan civilization. So one thing that always comes in mind is about the Harappan and Mohenjo-daro sites. And now they are into a major part of that those sites are in Pakistan. So tell us more about that. Like what is over there and what do we have here?
See, like Harappan civilization has got 5 important metropolitan cities. So
Okay.
out of five, two are in India and 3 are in Pakistan. So like Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and Ganveriwala. So these 3 sites are in Pakistan, and Rakhigadi and Dholavira. These 2 are in India. But when we look at the overall count of Harappan sites, like right from the very tiniest site to the largest site, so Pakistan has got somewhere around 1,000 sites, and India has got more than 1,500 sites. So the count
Okay.
wise, we have more sites in India. But as I said, like the 3 very big cities, they are in Pakistan. Now,
Okay.
again, like when we talk about, the archaeology which is happening in Pakistan, so I'm really like, I have very good friends in Pakistan. They are working in government departments, they are working in the university departments and all that. So they are trying their best to, preserve and conserve these remains in Pakistan, whether they are like, belonging to Harappan sites or or belonging to the Buddhist monasteries, or maybe belonging to the the what they call it as a Hindu Shahi period. So that is
Okay.
basically the time bracket when they started constructing temples and all that. So they're at their level base, they are trying to conserve and preserve those artifacts. They are trying to preserve these monuments even. So they are taking care of monuments. And obviously, like they are doing the excavations. Like one of my friend who is from Hazra University, so he's excavating a Buddhist monastic site, Mansera. So he is doing the conservation and preservation of that site. So like that, they are doing very good work in Pakistan again. And only thing is that unfortunately, because of the the relations and because of the political situations, we are not able to directly the share data. But then
Right.
obviously, like the internet is there, emails are there, so we keep exchanging our data. So now coming to that, if you want, I can show you some of the photographs from Pakistan side.
Yes, please. We'll love to see that.
I'll just can you see?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, now this one you can see. This is from the site of Mehergarh, which is in the Balochistan region of Pakistan. So here you can see there are paintings done on the wall. So these are red and blue color dots. So these are the paintings which are surviving at least since 7000 BC. So when I say 7000 BC, basically I'm including 2000 of current year as well. So these are 7000-year old paintings and they are surviving in a very good condition. Then these are the some of the structures I'm showing you. These are called as a pit dwellings. So initially when the settlement was done in Ghaggar and Hakra and the river valleys of Harappan civilization. So initially they never constructed overground houses. So instead of that, they did this underground construction. So these are called pit dwellings. So the bigger one is for the staying purpose, and the smaller ones they are called as the secondary pits or auxiliary pits. So those are for keeping the chicken or keeping the grains, or maybe some of them are like dustbins. So this is how they used to stay.
Okay.
And this is the famous Great Bath.
Right. Yeah.
Okay,
Of
now you can,
Mohenjo-daro, right?
yeah, Mohenjo-daro. So you can see the steps. So similar steps are here, and then the whole flooring of this tank is basically they have put gypsum in that. So
Okay.
gypsum is being the water resistant. So using gypsum, they have tried to make it as a waterproof. Then this is the granary from Harappa. So you can see like these are the, obviously the walls are gone completely, only the foundation is remaining.
Right.
So this is the granary. So where this was centrally administered part. So the grain collection which was done from the neighboring villages or from other sites, so that used to come here, and that is like it was kept in this granary. And from
Right.
here it was distributed among the citizens.
Right. Wow.
Then yeah,
It
this
was
is the,
so structured. Absolutely, like it feels like they had the scale and pencil and all those instruments and so perfectly
yeah.
aligned together. Wow.
Then this is the famous dockyard
Lothal.
of Lothal. So
Right.
this is again one of its kind in South Asia. This is the earliest and the only known dockyard. This is what I was talking about, like the civic amenities and all that. So these Harappans were so much careful about people and the citizens, that not only they constructed good houses, then the taking care of house corners, but again you can see here, this is the road at the site of Harappa, and they have put a
Okay.
divider. This is a divider between road. So that
Oh,
okay, so that this is how they have done the two-way traffic system to manage the bullock carts.
wow. That is so interesting.
Yeah, so this is how they put a divider in the, and this is the main road of Harappa.
Okay.
Okay, now this is something very fascinating. Like Indians are always thought to be the bad manners people. Like they don't have proper toilets, or they don't have proper washrooms. But then
Right.
here you can see the evidence. This is again from the site of Harappa. So this is
Okay.
actually a commode.
Okay.
Okay, so this is a latrine. This is a commode. This storage jar is in front of that, And when this was excavated, now here you can see this is a big pot. Inside that there is a small pot cave. So this is basically a water storage area, and this pot is basically to take out the water. And
Right.
this is
So
the
yeah.
commode. Okay,
Wow.
now again, like even if you look at Mesopotamia or you look at China, you look at Egypt, you don't have evidences of such type of the sort of latrines or sort of drainages which Harappan people constructed. So you don't have those evidences at other civilization. Only
Okay.
in Harappan civilization you find all these drainage systems, whether it is a stormwater drainage system or the the sewage system. So it was developed only by Harappans.
Oh, that is so interesting. And they were so intelligent, and I think they had this sense of cleanliness as well, hygiene, and also the community waste management.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, and even like now what we call as an English bond method of construction,
Okay.
like that is header and stretcher. So that English bond method is actually not English bond method. That is basically what Harappan started. So that is a Harappan bond method, which actually we should call, not
Yeah.
English bond.
Yeah.
Then again, this is some different type. Like see, like when we look at into archaeology, so obviously when there are cities, so obviously there needs to be the villages. When there are villages, there needs to be some sort of a farmstead settlement. So like there should be the hierarchy of settlements, like what is even today we have. Like we have cities, we have capitals, we have metropolitan cities, we have large villages, small villages, farmsteads. So the similar style we are still following.
Yeah.
So similarly, the Harappans, like normally when we talk about Harappan, people think that everything is like Dholavira, everything is like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, but that is absolutely wrong. These are only 5 metropolitan cities. Otherwise, the majority of the settlements are the tiny, smaller settlements where people are carrying out different activities. So they are normal people. Like they are not very like living the luxurious life. They are like having a normal life. And one of that site which I excavated in Gujarat is the site of this Kotara Badli. Now here you can see like these are the structural area or the residential complex. So it is very simple. This site doesn't have any sort of the drainage system. They don't have any sort of latrines. So again, it is very typical of rural sort of environment. Even today we can see in India. Like the cities has got all the amenities, but whereas when we go into the rural areas, then we don't find those sort of amenities. So exactly similar thing we are getting at the site of Kotaravali. So this is the basically the structure what we excavated. And then here you can see where my pointer is. So this is the intercommunicating door. There is
Okay.
another intercommunicating door here, this side. Then there is an intercommunicating door here. Right. Then there is an intercommunicating door here, which is broken here at this. Then it was here in the earlier stage, but then they later on open it completely. So this is how we could see how the construction style is done and all that. So this is the photograph of that intercommunicating door. So here you can see nicely placed, the stepping stone is there. Then there is another stone on the top, and then you enter into the room. Again, like this is the fortification wall of Harappan period. Now you can see these bastions. So this is the corner bastion. Now this bastion concept or the fortification wall concept. So that was again started by Harappans.
Okay.
So they started constructing this. Now the difference between when we look at early historic or medieval period, like the forts and all that. So normally when we look at forts, we see that the bastions are circular in shape.
Hmm.
But the Harappans never did circular bastion. They were either rectangular or square.
Okay.
So they never constructed semicircular or they never constructed circular bastions. So they always did the rectangular or the square ones.
Okay. So was there any particular reason that they used to stick to the square or the rectangle shape?
See, basically it was easier for them to make the right angle rather than going for a curvature. Because when
Right.
you go for the curvature, then you have to use the brick, you need to have that curvature for the brick or the stone. You need to cut that to give
Ha.
the circular direction.
Yeah.
But
So this
instead of
was a easy technique to
yes,
follow. Yeah.
then this is the central bastion, and backside you can see the excavated area, that is the residential complex, and this
Yeah.
is the central bastion of the site. And here you can see there is a evidence of an earthquake. So where the middle bastion was collapsed because of the earthquake. And then you can see like how they have done the reconstruction, but it is not done properly. And that's why at the base you have the smaller stones and the bigger stones on the top. But that is not the way to do the construction.
Right. Right.
Then this is the floor tile. So you can see these concentric circles.
Yeah.
So this is the tile, and even in fact at one of the site in Pakistan that is called as a Kodiji. So they have actually found a bathtub,
Okay.
and
So like the
that
real bathtub what we
yeah,
have today.
yes,
Okay.
real bathtub like what we have today. And then that at the base, same sort of tiles have been used,
Okay.
and it's a huge bathtub. Like one person can sleep very easily.
Wow.
Now we'll look at this. These are the terracotta figurines of male and female. Now,
Okay.
what is important here? Here you can see like the type of headgear this male is wearing. So this is a turban.
Right.
Okay. Then here you can see the different type of necklaces he is wearing. Similarly, you can see for the female, you can see the different type of hairstyles. What they have done. Like if you look at the first one, she doesn't have this sort of hairstyle. The
Yeah.
hairstyle is different. Now here she has got different hairstyle. Now this is basically shows like at Mehergarh we have number of female terracotta figurines and they have different hairstyles. And actually that shows that it must be a separate group of artisan who was doing these hairstyles. So it was in practice. Probably the woman was doing different type of hairstyles, and there was a specific person who was doing that. So it was a specialized activity.
Right.
Then looking at the turban, again we can understand that if he's wearing turban, that means it is made of a cloth.
Yeah.
Then these are the different types of, the seals and ceilings what we get from Pakistan and India and all the different parts. So, you get different types of animals on these. Then there are different types of figurines which are identified by people in a different way.
Yeah.
So then these are some of the types of seals. Then here again you can see like there is a jar here. Then it has like a plant sort of motif. In between there is one person standing. There
Yes.
is a one figure which is basically bending and praying in front of that. Then there are again some figurines at the bottom. Then here again this is a hero which is fighting with two tigers.
Yes.
So these are the seals which we get in the Harappan types. And this is the cemetery area. So these are the types of burials what we find in the Harappan site. So there are like symbolic burials in the sense where you get only the burial goods or what we call as a furniture. So only the pots are kept or some ornaments are kept, but there is no skeleton. So that is called
Okay.
as a symbolic burial.
Okay.
But then what you are seeing is here is a proper complete burial. You can see the complete skeleton in that.
Yes. And
There's a
that is
complete
so well preserved actually after all these years.
yeah. So this is from the site of Farmana in Haryana.
Okay.
So you can see all these burials.
Wow.
This is the burial complex from the site of Sanauli, which is in Bagpat district of Uttar Pradesh. So this is
Right.
a famous site now because of its association with Mahabharata and all that. So it is always there in the talks. So this is the site. And now what we have found here, so you can see this is the major coffin, and
Okay.
then very close to that coffin there is a chariot. So
Mm-hmm.
this is the chariot. So you can see this is the wheel of the chariot and this is another wheel. So now because the wheel was made out of wood, so the wood is decomposed completely. But what we are getting is basically the shape of the wheel, and then on that they have actually done the decoration using the copper, small copper arrowheads.
Wow.
So these copper arrowheads are still sticking there in a circular direction. Then here you can see the stump, that is the middle one. So this goes straight, and this one what we are seeing is a broken ear, so that goes on the neck of the horse or maybe on a donkey or whatever.
Right.
Then here you can see this is the shield. There is a helmet here, there is a shield here, then these are two antenna swords, then there is a mirror here, and then there is a comb. So this is made out of wood. So now see, like this is how we get different type of objects. Now, when we look at Harappan, or when we look at the legends and traditions, and our great epics like Mahabharata or Ramayana, or our the Vedic literature and all that. So
Yeah.
somewhere at the end, we need to understand whether we can connect this past with the text or not.
Hmm.
And then it is very difficult, because whatever is written in the text, because the texts are modified continuously, there is a lot of the input of or additions are done, or sometimes there is the older data is removed, some new data is filled into that. So a lot of additions are there in the text, so it becomes very difficult actually to identify which one is the old portion, which one is the added one.
Right.
And then the type of the descriptions we find, so probably those descriptions are later much added much later in the text. But what we need to do is basically we need to some sort of do the sieving of the material or the text, and then try to find out the core of that text, so we can understand what was exactly they are talking about, and what sort of material culture they are talking about. And then probably we may be able to show some sort of a connection, but at this stage it's very really difficult to do that.
Right.
And this is the site called Chirand in Bihar, which I have excavated last year. So mostly what we have found here is a Kushan period, so that is a early historic period material. And on the
Okay.
back side you can see this is the Ganga, and then we have found these platforms like 1, 2, 3, 4. There is a fifth one here, there is a down here, another one. So we have found these small platforms, so probably these are like the votive stupa platforms. And then you can see here the construction activity, like it is done in the step fashion. It is a
Right.
step sort of construction. And these are the antiquities what we are getting. So these are the typical Kushan period antiquities. Like here, these two are called as a, one is the female, one is a male. So they are called as a Naigamesh and Naigameshi. Then these are some of the sculptures of that period. Then these are the terracotta beads. Then you have, these are the print rolls which are used for the cloth printing. Then the lamps, then terracotta games ones, like like these are the playing sort of objects like the chase and all that. Then these sling balls are basically for killing small birds.
Okay.
And then these are the terracotta hopscotch. So again, they are used for playing different sort of games. Like even today in the villages, they play different sort of games and all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Right now, again, this site is interesting for understanding the local history and tradition, because the name is Chiran. And
Right.
this is in the Chhapra. This is in the Chhapra, and very close to Chhapra, the town of Ara is there. Okay, so you
Okay.
must be familiar with this name, Ara Chhapra, right?
Right.
Okay, now what is the meaning of Chiran? Why this site has got the name Chiran, or the village has got the name Chiran? So we did again a documentation of legends. We went to the old people in the villages and tried to understand the stories of a village,
Yes.
what they know.
Yeah.
And like there is one story that this Ananda, who was a disciple of Buddha,
Huh.
so he came to the site of Chiran, and and he died there. And then there was a dispute over his body, who will claim that body, because some other people also came from some other sites or the region, and they said that no, because he was a disciple of Buddha, so we want a portion of his body. So
Okay.
now to tackle that, what to do with the body? Like how should we, divide the body? So finally, what they did is basically they cut half the body. Okay, using hacksaw. So that is basically what is called as a ari in Hindi.
Right. Huh.
Right. So now the place where Ananda was cut into two parts. So that is Chirand. Chirand means to saw
Cheer diya.
someone. Chir diya. Right.
Okay.
So the
Right.
name got Chirand. Now that Ari, so it was after that it was thrown away in the air. So where it went and basically got placed. So that town became Ara. So Ara comes from Ari. So that is
Okay.
basically the hacksaw. Okay,
Right.
so this is how you get the interesting stories. Now, whether they have a real truth in that or not, but what is important is that you at least understand why particular village has got certain name, how it is
Right.
derived,
Yeah.
right? So that is very important. So similarly, like this was one story, like that we have 10 different stories where the character changes. So instead of Ananda, there is Arjun, there is Sri Krishna. So the character keeps changing, but the story is on the similar line where the body is cut,
Right.
but the characters keep changing.
Yeah.
So
And I think that is how the entire mythology has been formed, and
yeah,
stories keep coming from one place to another, and they keep changing according to the places as well as during different eras.
yes, definitely. And then obviously what happens that the small, if there are small groups like which are more of a, they are like using the local deities and all that. So the again the bigger python starts taking out these, the smaller deities into their fold, and slowly they get absorbed into the main fold. So this is how, the larger complex develops automatically, the larger religious complex.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
so one of the best case, again I will show you this one. Like like as a child we have always heard about Panchatantra,
Yeah.
or like Panchatantra stories are very common. Like,
Yeah.
now this is a jar which is from the site of Lothal. Now
Okay.
the painting which is done is here, which is, you can see that the painting. This is from the pot, which is done on the pot. Like you can see this deer is here.
Yeah.
Okay, so now what this panel shows is basically there is a here there is a storage jar or water jar.
Right.
Then there is a crow here. So this is basically a story from Panchatantra where crow drops stone and he raises the water level.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so this is how we have the evidences of what we called as a legend, traditions, or the oral histories. But we do get record of such type of stories in the archaeological material. But only
Okay.
thing is that we need to look at from different angle. If we keep looking from the similar angle and just looking at अरे वहाँ पे डियर है यहाँ पे कौवा है डॉक्यूमेंट कर दिया छोड़ दिया,
Right.
so it
So we
is
have
not
to connect those different parts, what we know, and try to make a sense out of it, and why this should be and how it could have been.
right. And one of the most important thing what I always say is that you like one should know the local culture.
Hmm.
अगर मुझे लोकल कल्चर के स्टोरीज ही पता नहीं है तो मुझे अगर कुछ मिल भी जाएगा तभी मुझे पता नहीं चलेगा कि कुछ मिला है.
राइट, उसका इम्पोर्टेंस ही नहीं पता रहेगा ना कि ये
Right.
यहाँ पे क्यों है. या
Right. So like the most important thing is what to like, is basically to interact with people.
राइट.
Try to understand their living ways. Try to understand the religious ways. Like see, like probably, like the way people are doing performing different pujas or performing different rituals, that might be very similar. The baseline must be very similar.
या
But the type of objects they use or the type of material they use, it changes because it changes because of the environmental conditions. It changes because of the availability of the raw material. It changes, and once the raw material is changed, then definitely there is a change in the shape.
या
So we need to understand this sort of, the variations what we are getting in the local pockets. And once we understand those local variations, then only we can able to understand the archaeological material.
राइट.
Then yeah, look, this is a fantastic example of Indian penal code or judiciary system.
यस.
Nobody will believe that this one stone, like there are two basically, one and two, you can see in the photograph, two stones.
या या
These two stones decides where you have done any crime or not in the village.
ओके. एंड
So
हाउ इज दैट लाइक हाउ डू वी डिसाइड?
yes, so let me tell you story. So this is from Gujarat.
ओके.
Somewhere near Jafrabad, there is a village, and in the field we have these two big stone slabs, basically. And the tradition says that when Pandava were in exile, so they came here. And then, obviously Bhim was very large. He was a very hefty person. So for the rest of Pandavas, they could construct a normal size bed, but for Bhima, they required a very heavy duty bed because otherwise Bhima could not get accommodated into that.
राइट.
So what they did basically, they constructed a bed made out of stone for him.
ओके.
Now, so now what you are seeing here, these two pillars sort of a thing or a slabs, So those are basically legs of his bed.
Acha.
And then can you see here a small rectangle opening?
Yeah.
So this person is coming out of that, this
Oh.
hole. Okay. Now this hole is basically a joint between two legs. So you
Acha.
can now the two legs are missing, only two are remaining. So people feel that because Bhima used to sleep on this bed, so these two legs are very pious.
Huh.
And you can see like how small this hole is basically.
Yes, it is very
Okay.
small.
Right. Now if some crime is happening in the village, so they don't go to police, they don't go to any panchayat, they don't go anywhere. They bring that person to this field, and then he is supposed to go through this hole. So if he comes out, that means he has not done any crime. If he gets stuck in this hole, that means he has done the crime and he gets the punishment.
Oh, wow. Quite
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah. So and why it is this? Because this is Bhima's dead. So Bhima is a pious, he is a god.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the belonging of Bhima won't lie.
Right.
Okay, so that is the tradition what we have. Now they don't go to police. They come to this, this sort of a bed, and the person has to go inside and come out.
Right.
So now they asked me to do that, but I never tried. I said that I am not going to do that. Sorry, I know that I will get stuck if that is true. So I made my driver to go inside,
Okay.
but he could come out, and he was very happy. And he said that okay, now I am pious. So even if I have done any crime, God has given me, forgiven me. So I don't need to care anymore now.
Right. So it has that religious and faith and belief connection to,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. So and it is not only that they have religious belief, but look at that they don't go to police or they don't go to court even.
I know.
So look at the traditions to the extent which they are actually helping the rural communities.
Right. But then, on the other hand, if we look, then with whatever motive or say religious belief, they are actually trying to save. Otherwise, by this time, iske char tukde karke, they must have used it for the raw material to build their
Yes.
houses or anything. But because
Yes.
they have this belief that this is a very auspicious thing,
Yeah, that's why they are not touching it.
yeah, yeah, and I think that is very good kind of thing. I don't want to go into the superstitious point of view, but then such things or such beliefs or such mythological stories are helping us preserve our culture or such heritage monuments.
Yes, definitely, definitely. See, like even whatever the sites they are preserved now, so they are
Yeah,
preserved because of the some sort of the concepts they have. Like the probably some sort of God is staying there, or the evil is staying there. If you go there and try to dig out, then there will be a curse of a God or an evil will come to your house. So
yeah,
that's why in some of the areas they don't touch the ancient mounds, and this is how they are surviving.
yeah. In fact, there is this Veergarh and Gaddhegarh
Yeah,
also.
yeah,
So I think in a
yes,
lot of places they have placed those things where, like, I think it is related to again the land. Like if I donate a land to you, and if
right,
I hope that you don't destroy it, so I
right.
place a Gaddhegarh over there, and it is kind of giving a sharp कि अगर आपने कुछ मेरे land का किया, तो ये sharp आपको लग जाएगा.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is the last basically story which talks about how the our traditional knowledge system is important. So these are the terracotta horses. So you can see there is a saddle gun. You can see this like saddle on the back here.
Yeah.
So these are the terracotta horses. Now we got this in a huge number from the survey in our from the Kutch. So like we were like wondering like how to put them in a chronological bracket. We don't know even like these sort of the terracotta horses are available in archaeological record, because for the first time we got this. So nobody else reported these sort of horses earlier from that area. Then even the associated cultural material which we are getting in exploration, so that was also not documented by anyone. So for the first time we got some completely different set of assemblage, and we had no clue where to put that in the chronological order. Now in Kutch, if you move around, you will find that there are small temples dedicated to horse riders. So those are very common. Then there is one famous temple at Deupar Yaksha. So on the hillock there is a temple which is dedicated to these horse riders. And now, so we started collecting, the data again, like the legends and traditions, talking with older people, like why there is a horse rider, how you perform puja, why you do that. So we started inquiring, and then what we realized that there is a common thread in every story, that there were people who came from Byzantine, and they started staying in Kutch, near Bhuj area, like Nakhatrana and all that area. And they were all pious people, and most of them were like the medical doctors. So they started helping out the local population, giving them medicines, giving them free sort of advice and all that. And the king didn't like that, because their popularity started growing in that area. So what king did is basically he got them and put them into the jail. Now, obviously, there are a lot of variations of this story, but again, as I said, the basic is same in all the story. So I'm just telling you the basic, not all the stories. So now there were seven brothers and one sister. So all of them were put behind the bars, and then somehow one of the brother could got escape. Then he went to the hill, nearby hill. So actually, that story gives the name of the hill also. So that is like a Budrao. So there are different hills which they talk about, and even today, all those hills are have the same name, which we are getting in the legends.
Okay.
And then he goes there and asks for the help, and then army comes from the Byzantine, and they kill all this the ruler, and then whole population was freed from the ruler, and that's why they started worshipping these bull figure, like these horse riders in that area. Now, original story says that they came from Byzantine, but slowly, what happened is basically, Byzantine riders, they became incarnation of Brahma. Now they are basically become the brothers of Shiva. So this is how now the older original story is now sidelined, and people started worshipping them as a part of Brahma or Vishnu.
Okay.
Okay, so this is what I say, like, the smaller version of any particular deity or the local deity is basically absorbed into the main-fold activity.
Hmm.
And then we lose the original connection of that story.
Right.
And then looking at the cultural material, we could exactly date that particular episode when it must have happened. So it must have happened somewhere between 9th century AD to 11th century AD. So that's the time bracket when this particular episode must have happened in Kutch.
Right.
Okay, so this is how the legends, traditions, they help us to understand material culture, or the archaeological material help us to understand the validity of text, or how much we can take up from the text. So again, it is all interlinked, like at the site of Kotaravalli. So like one of the important thing what we could do at the site is basically is a residue analysis. The residue analysis is like lipid profile, which we do for our blood.
Right.
So we actually did the lipid profiling of the pots. So just to see that, can we understand what sort of a material was stored in that, or what sort of a material was cooked in the pot. So actually we could retrieve, a fish from the pot. So we can say 100% sure that actually cooked fish in that. Then
Okay.
we have got oil, vegetable oil we have found in that. Then we have got this goat, the flesh content in that. And one of the best thing what we have got, which was making a lot of problem for archaeologists, particularly Harappan archaeologists. So have you seen the perforated jar?
Yes.
Yeah. So now people were wondering what is the use of this perforated jar. There are many theories, like religious use, and for the distillation of liquor, and for keeping vegetables fresh and all that. Now
Yeah.
we know for sure that this particular jar was basically used for making paneer,
Oh.
because we are getting the evidence of milk from that jar. So if I pour milk, so there are thousands of holes, the milk will come out. It will not get stored in that. So the only way milk product can be stored in that is basically when you are making a paneer. Because
Paneer.
when you make a paneer, you basically solidify milk first, and then you put in a cotton cloth, and that is
Yeah.
tied inside.
Yeah. So it becomes a little solidified, right?
Yes. So it basically, completely takes out the water. So that's why we are getting, so that's why we are very sure now, because we have scientific data to prove that this perforated jars were basically used for manufacturing of paneer.
Wow.
So this is how we are trying to interlink, and then we are trying to understand the stories. Then we are trying to understand basically the relationship, like the small villages versus the big towns versus the the metropolitan cities. What was the relation, and what
Right.
sort of goods they were trading with each other. So we are trying to understand basically the more rather than looking at only cultural material and all that. We are
Yeah.
trying to understand heritage in a perspective of development and a human mankind.
Hmm.
So that is the only way where we can connect ourselves. Otherwise, if we keep only talking about red wear, gray wear, bull figurines, this structure, wo structure, we cannot connect ourselves.
Right.
So if
Absolutely.
we so if we need to connect, then we need to have this sort of the way to understand.
Hmm. So I think if you just go to one particular archaeological site, you get the history and culture, traditions, ritual, food, everything. You get to know everything about that particular place. And
Yes.
archaeology, I would say it's like a total combination of all different sciences and what do you call like so many things together. I mean, I don't know how to put it across, but it is so wonderful. Oh,
See, archaeology is as complex as our mind.
right. I had one more question that have you found any evidences of Vastu Shastra being used in the ancient architecture?
Yes, see, basically, like what we called as a Vastu Shastra, or even if you go back, then in Kautilya's Arthashastra, he basically talks about the plans of the towns, like how the town should be and how it should be divided. So that is given in Kautilya's Arthashastra as
Right.
well. So, looking at that, there is one person, Michael Denino. He's from the IIT Gandhinagar. So he basically tried to understand the settlement of Dholavira, which is the Harappan site. So he actually, did the measurement of each area, like the citadel area versus middle town versus lower town, and then he actually showed that how it is exactly in a proportionate with the, the sort of we get, the plans or the structures and everything. So he has tried to connect with that.
Right. Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I thought we lost the connection. Right. So I have a further question as well that when as a traveler, when we visit this heritage sites, so what are the things that we should follow? What are the do's and don'ts? And particularly when I go to a site and if I don't have a guide, or sometimes we do have guides which tell us about some archaeological history of that particular location, but if we don't have, then what are how can we be more observant to the finer details of that place, and how can we try to analyze that what history does this site carry with us? So this is something more related as a tourist rather than like a research scholar. So as a layman, as a normal tourist, how can we behave at a one particular site?
See, like if the site is excavated site, and if you don't have a guide, the best guide is that just go into the village and ask any person or any like villager that if anybody is there who has worked when the excavation was going on, because these laborers they know everything, because if they were the part of the excavation, so they know exactly, they know where the wall was found, what sort of material was found. So in fact they become better archaeologists than us in a year of 3 or 3 year span. So they can tell you everything what an archaeologist can tell you. So if there is no guide, don't worry. Just ask for the villager who has worked at the site and he can explain you everything.
Right.
Then as far as the do's and don'ts, so probably for Indians, don'ts are like, more than do's. So basically, like we have a very bad habit of like, suppose there is a structure. So we always like to click a selfie going on the top of the structure, standing there and taking a photograph.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So avoid that, because for people or for a layman it is a fun going on the top of the structure and standing and taking a photograph, but it is the years of pain which archaeologists has taken to uncover that. So if somebody stands on that and if two bricks are fallen or maybe two stones are fallen, so that is basically we are weakening the wall doing that.
Right.
Okay, so if the wall can survive for 10 years, we are making the life of 8 years instead of 10 years by breaking that. So don't stand on the structures. You can stand next to that, but don't stand on the structures. Don't run on the structures. Don't try to poke the structure. अरे इसके दो brick के बीच में क्या है? So don't do that because like if you need that, it is available. It is printed already. The archaeologist has done that. They have made the reports available, so you can easily find out from the internet what is there in between two bricks. So for
Right.
that, layman doesn't need to poke that and take out the soil.
Right.
Then the third thing what we always do is basically collecting a lot of material from the site.
Yeah, that is what a lot of people do actually.
Yeah, so we collect pottery, we collect beads, we collect whatever we find, broken bangle pieces, we collect everything. And then as a hobby, we bring it back home. Maybe for next 1 month, we show off to everyone, look, this is what I have got. And after 2 months, we don't even know where the artifacts are gone in the house. Right? They go into dump yard, they go into go down, they go somewhere in the backyard somewhere, and we don't even know them where they are gone. So why you want to collect that?
Right.
It's a part of heritage. Let it be there. Don't collect it. You can take a photograph. Just take the photograph, but don't gift anything. Just leave it there where it is.
Right.
Then thirdly, like don't be rude to the local people. Okay, so let's see. Like if the foreigner comes, like I can see it everywhere, whether it is village, whether it is metropolitan, everywhere. Even in the society, if any foreigner comes, people will come out and look at it or look at her. Right?
Yeah.
Because this is something like, अरे गोरा आया है, तो हमको देखना है. Right? So similar way, for the villagers, we are alien. Like people are wearing shorts, people are wearing t-shirts, then some sort of the weird sort of hats and all that. So for them, it is a time pass for them to look at you people. So don't get angry with them. Just imagine what we will do if some the foreigner is coming in front of you with a weird hairstyle. So we are going to look at. Right? So that is the similar expression. Only thing is that because we stay in a very regulated society, our expressions are more polished.
Yes.
Right? So their expressions might be a little bit rude, but they don't feel to harm you. It is just the expression.
Yeah.
So don't fight with them. If you go and ask them, कि अरे भाई देखो हमको ये चीज देखना है, मुझे ये चीज खरीदना है, किसके पास अच्छा मिलेगा? These people will remain with you throughout day. They will help you out.
Absolutely.
So it is only the way you connect with them.
Right.
Then see, like, and then again there is a problem. Like sometimes like the local people, they have a different vocabulary.
Yeah.
They have मतलब बोलने का तरीका अलग होता है, ढंग अलग होता है, right? And then people start laughing at them.
Yes.
तो उनको बुरा लगता है. They feel awkward, like, and they don't open up. They don't talk with other people then because they feel that अरे मैं कुछ बोलूंगा तो लोग मेरे ऊपर हंसेंगे. And that's the way we actually cut down the communication and we cut down on the amount of information which we can get from these people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree to it. Totally.
So these are the certain things. Like I'm not saying that you be too friendly with the people, but at least treat them as a people, as a normal human being, and you will be benefited out of that. Anyone who goes without guide, without any connection, if you speak normally, they will help you out. They will do everything for you, and they are the excellent people.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing. Like respect. Like don't write name on the walls. Don't put your heart on that. So these are the basic things. If we follow, probably we can have our better heritage and the conservation. That can save thousands of rupees of government to clean up the names from the sites.
Yeah, definitely. Prabhu, can you stop the screen share so that our videos get started? Yes. Yeah. So when we are talking about, you're saying that we write the names on, say, the walls of such heritage sites and all. And so I have a question here. So, people in, especially in Maharashtra or Rajasthan, wherever we have forts, so people have this thing that why don't the government save our forts? Why don't they build them or restore them? And they have this that we have to save our say history. We have to conserve our properties, and people and government is not looking after it. And so there comes this patriotism thing in between. So what is the whole thing that how these sports can be restored, and why it is so difficult to restore the sports? So I want to hear those things from you.
See, basically, forts, like they have a huge magnitude. They are huge in size.
Yeah.
So the expenditure which involves in, like maybe in conservation or restoration, even forget about conservation, restoration, and preservation. Even if they go for the cleaning of forts, so that will be a huge budget for that.
Right.
Now, secondly, like fortunately in Maharashtra, we have large number of forts. Now, again, the problem is that you as a government agency, like the government has limitations, like with the financial capacities what government has got or what the central government is giving for as a funds for the restoration. So there is a limitation to that, because first of all, like, see, it's a basic economics, like how much you are putting and how much revenue you are getting out of that. Okay, it's a
Yeah.
simple statistics. So now somewhere that statistics doesn't go very much, in a combination when we talk about forts.
Yeah.
Like not about only forts, like similar thing is happening with large number of archaeological sites also, that they are not able to conserve the sites because there are no visitors. Because when we expect that there should be a visitors coming to the site, so we need to create that sort of a facilities as well. Like we need to have a restaurants, we need to have a restrooms, then we need to have a, the proper guides there, then we need to have a some sort of a shows there. So everything that is comes as a package. So it is not that only you have done the conservation and then you are left. So
Yeah.
we need to have that package. But fortunately now, because the Maharashtra government has taken the initiative, they are doing with Raigad and all that. So at least they have taken the initiative. The work of Raigad has been started. So
Yes.
then in the line, they are like there are many ports they have put up in the proposal. So at least now the beginning has done with the Maharashtra government. They are taking active part in that. So maybe slowly the situation will change. But don't expect that all of the force can be done, because there is a financial limitation to government as well.
Yeah. And I think
So
there is another important aspect of actually the techniques and the tools to restore this forts, like what materials to be used. And I mean, I think we have to think about like trying to rebuild it. We are not trying to actually destroy it. You know?
see, that is one of the thing. Like like if you use cement, probably in a few thousand rupees you can restore the fort. But then that is not useful, right?
Right.
So we need to preserve the sanctity. We need to preserve the originality. So that has to be taken care. If somebody goes there and says that I have done the conservation of fort or any wall and they just put the plaster or the cement, so that is actually the crime they have done to the heritage structure, because that is not going to stop your, the deterioration of the wall. In
Yeah.
fact, what you are going to get is that the inner wall will be completely vacant and only the cement layer you will find after a few years. Now this is like something which people should also understand, like before going for conservation and all those things. So they should actually consult expert. If they have a good amount of money, it is in fact good that we should have the private people coming ahead, contributing funds, doing conservation. We need people for that. But before that, they should consult a proper the architect, heritage architect, or a conservation specialist, so that nothing goes wrong.
Yeah.
If you're putting the money, then put it in the right way, and then that can be done. Like if the hundreds of people from Maharashtra comes forward, they donate money, they are ready to do that, then probably whole of all the force we can do it. Like, but only thing is that there should be a proper guidance to them.
Yeah,
They should take a
absolutely.
proper, like understanding of that, and they should do that. In fact,
Yeah,
Right.
as long as there is no private, like we need to have a private sort of, the players coming into this right
Right.
now, because government alone cannot do everything.
absolutely.
So there should be a private partnership.
Yes. I think Aniket has a
Yes.
question for you now.
Right. Dr. Prabodh, like you were telling us about how tourism can get involved and how private players can be there. I wanted to understand what exactly role does the Archaeological Survey of India play in maintaining, restoring, and even protecting the monuments, and how does it differ from the state heritage boards? So there, every individual state also has a board. So how does the role overlap and how is the distinction done? So how do we decide whether a particular monument goes under the archaeological survey or does it come under a state, and how is it maintained differently? So can you tell us how these monuments are segregated and
Yeah, see,
classified?
the monuments which are of national importance, so they go under ASI.
Okay,
And
right.
the monuments which are of a state importance, so they
Hmm.
are basically looked after the state. Then
Okay,
even now you can see like Pune Municipal Corporation or Mumbai Bruhan Maharashtra Corporation. So they have also added their list of like heritage complexes. So
right.
those are at the local level.
Okay.
So this is
Uh,
how they do categorization.
Okay. So whenever a new site is found, or let's say a fort or something which was not found before, maybe a fort, maybe a historic temple, or it is probably part of a village, but it wasn't documented to be a piece of history. When it is recorded that this is a piece of history, what are the steps to get it classified as a heritage monument? Can you tell us a little more about it? What are the steps involved?
See, there are rules and regulations by Archaeological Survey of India.
Okay.
Okay, so if you go by their rules and regulation, so first of all, you need to prove that why it is important at national level or at state level. So
Right.
what is the importance of that? Whether it has got very something unique feature in that, some a unique history is hidden in that. So you have to identify a unique feature of that. So which is not
Okay.
there in other sort of structures or temples. So what is
Right.
the unique in that? And that uniqueness will make your the temple as a the protected
Okay.
monument.
Right. 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 Okay, sir.
Right. Also, I would like to add like a personalized question that there are these petroglyphs at Ratnagiri. So,
Ratnagiri.
yeah. So, can you tell something about them?
Yeah, see this initially, like the work in that area was actually started by Professor Vishwas Gupte from Deccan College. So when
Okay.
he was excavating the sites like Chaul, he excavated at Chaul. So
Yeah.
so while that excavation, basically when he was doing exploration, so he found those petroglyphs. So the different like rabbit and the fish and all those sort of engravings he found. Then later on, this Professor Gokte, then Dr. Shrikant Pradhan from our university, and myself, we actually wrote a paper long back in 2006 in a journal that is Indian Ocean Archaeology. So we wrote a paper in 2006. Then now it has become a huge, sort of a thing, and then people suddenly started working, and everybody is taking interest into that. But like it is very unfortunate that even till today, the only official, the paper is published by us in the Journal of Indian Ocean Archaeology. Otherwise, you will see only people talking, giving references, or giving the talk shows or writing in the columns in the newspaper and all that. But not a single paper has come yet apart from our paper. But they don't refer our paper. They neglect our paper for any reasons. I don't know. But
Okay.
anyways, but then when we worked on that, so we have specifically stated that okay, these petroglyphs which are there, so it is very difficult to date them because we don't have any cultural material. We are not getting any sort of a dateable object. Like if you get pottery, we can do thermoluminescence. If you are getting charcoal or something burnt object, we can do C14 or we can do AMS dating. But we don't have any dateable object from that. Now, so for me, like when I as archaeologists look at these petroglyphs, so dating them is very difficult. So people are giving date of 10,000 BC, 15,000 and everything, but
Right.
that is completely speculation. And without proper dating, scientific methods, scientific dating, you cannot say that this is 10,000 or 15,000. It is very
Oh,
difficult to say that. And this is not only in Rajapur or that area. So that goes up to like, from Bhu to Rajapur. Now there are sites along the Karnataka coastal line where they have found a similar type of engravings in the Karnataka also, coastal Karnataka region, which basically joins with the Goa.
right.
So now, yes, now that is extending into that area of Karnataka also. So it's a huge spread what we are getting throughout the coastal area. So it is not restricted only in the like Ratnagiri area, or it is not restricted in that. So it is everywhere on the coastal line we are getting that.
Right.
But as I said, like it is very difficult to date it.
Right. Can you just mention some of international archaeological sites you think that we as a traveler should definitely visit?
I would like to travel. Yeah. So I would like I would like love to go to Pakistan and see all the things.
Oh, pardon? I couldn't hear you. Sorry. Can you just repeat?
So what you asked? Sorry.
No. So I asked that as travelers, so which are the international sites, archaeological sites that you would recommend us to go and see?
Yeah, so I see if you get and if you are fortunate, you should go and visit Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, then Takshashila in Pakistan.
Yeah.
Then if you go into Iran, definitely you should visit, the sites like uh, this famous site there, Persepolis. So you
Okay.
should go to Persepolis. So that is a very important site. Then if you go to US, go to this Cahokia. That is a beautiful site, Cahokia, to see in US. Then obviously, like if you go to Turkey, then try to look at Çatalhöyük,
Okay.
Çatalhöyük in Turkey. So these are some of the very important sites. Or if you go to France, then look at the Locox Caves, where you have a beautiful rock paintings, the earliest rock paintings which man has made. So
Oh,
you can go and visit those sites. So like, see, like these are the sites. Or if you are in India, like I am sure, like many of the people have not visited Dholavira even.
no, definitely.
Yes, then start with Dholavira because that is the fantastic site. It is the open site. You can actually walk on Harappan Road and you can actually go inside a Harappan house and
Wow.
everything. You can actually walk in the Harappan drainage system.
Wow.
So that is
That
completely
will be
open.
so exciting.
Yeah, so it's an open site. So maybe those who are interested start with that, or even like Bhimbetka and all
Yeah.
that. That is near. But yes, apart from that, if you are going out, definitely look at all those sites.
Yes,
So that will be
definitely.
a wonderful experience. Or if you are going to Egypt, just go and look at the pyramids, Gaza, and all those.
Yeah.
Or if you are going to Italy, then definitely go and visit Pompeii.
Okay.
So that is one of the beautiful sites where you can see actually humans in the position how they got completely carbonized because of
Oh,
the volcano.
oh,
So you
okay.
can see actually the person eating bread and he's just frozen like in the action.
Wow.
So
That is that
yeah,
is
so you
really
should go
interesting.
and see that site. That is one of the beautiful sites, Pompeii.
Hmm. Wow. And how would you encourage our young students to take up archaeology or anthropology and as their career?
See, like career can go in different ways. So there is one like what we have been like like a very stereotype. We did our masters, we did PhD, we did UGC NET and got into teaching profession, and then now we will retire at the age of 60. So that's the normal way of looking at it. But then apart from that, there are a lot of opportunities, and now because of the cultural heritage management coming up and all that, so the opportunities has increased for people. Like they can go into tourism, they can go into museums, they can go into cultural heritage management. So there are different ways they can incorporate these different types of studies into that. Even like see like when you do anthropology and archaeology, so look at the companies like Coca-Cola or look at the companies like Amazon. Right?
Okay.
All these companies, they need a feedback from anthropologists. Now,
Okay.
what anthropologist does is basically if Coca-Cola is going to introduce say some new sort of a cold drink into market, so they need to do the market survey. They need to look at the advertisement section. So the advertisements, they are not meant for overall world. They are meant for country. Like the Coca-Cola advertisement with Aishwarya Rai coming and Diwali celebrations. So that is typically for India. So how they connect that? So for that they require anthropologists because they are the ones they are giving them data and saying that okay, these are the basically the manipulating areas where if you advertise using that, there is a probability that you will have a better market in the
Right.
this country. So
Yeah.
this is how the anthropologists are working for the different companies as well. So the only thing is that we need to open up and we need to look at for the different opportunities. And maybe you will get 100 rejections initially, but then be ready for that because you are trying to enter into the field where already scope is so limited. So maybe 100 rejections is not a better, is like not bad. It's okay.
Yeah.
But then there are different fields like that we can, anyone can go ahead rather than only thinking, अरे मेरा नेट हो जाएगा, मैं lecturer बन जाऊंगा, 60 साल में retired हो जाऊंगा. Okay, now see, like even with the government policies, then the amount of funds government are getting, so it is very difficult to get these sort of government jobs now. So
Yeah.
if we want to continue, then we need to have more privatization. Then look at from the angle of the starting the NGOs, which can help the local craftsmen. Then you can take the help of archaeology. Then you can ask them to reproduce the similar type of the material, and that can be flooded in the market.
Yeah.
And that was what आज के इसमें बहुत सारे चीजें होती है कि जिसमें जैसे डोकरा आर्ट है, ठीक है. So in that case, or even what you have this different styles of paintings you get, like Jaipur painting hai, Udaipur painting art hai. So basically what they are selling is the heritage what they are selling.
Yeah.
Right. So if you include into that archaeology, like if I am working in Rajasthan, so if I collect what are the products of Rajasthan in the Harappan times or early historic times, and then I start producing that and marketing that, so it will be the help for the the local craftsmen, as well as it will be a product which is completely different and that will have a market. So you can combine it in a different ways, or even the jewelry.
Yeah.
Right? And simplest thing. आजकल लोगों के पास शादी के लिए पैसा बहुत होता है. Destination weddings, right? They want theme-based destination weddings. So those who have done archaeology, they can say that okay, आपको Egyptian शादी करनी है, Roman शादी करनी है, Greek शादी करनी है, right? So I will have the whole theme based on Greek. Okay, so Greek culture. So right from decor to hairstyle to my wedding clothes, so everything will be Greek.
Wow.
And people are ready to pay for that. There are people who can pay for that. There is no problem, including your jewelry, your shoes, and everything will be theme based. You don't need to go to Rome or any sort of things. You can do it here, and that will be a perfect Roman wedding with Roman attire going back into 2nd century BC with the same hairstyle, with the same makeup, with the same clothes. And then that will be a completely different. So this is how you have to market archaeology in a different way. Otherwise, like maybe after a few years, this will be a dead field.
Yeah. You like gave it a totally different perspective altogether. Like who can think archaeology and wedding? In fact, you open doors for us travel tour operators to think about something new.
But see, that is the requirement of time.
Yeah.
Like we need to move away, and that is what I see. Like हम लोग का एक ऐसे वो घोड़े की तरह लग गया है कि हम लोग वैसे ही देखेंगे. But now we need to see around, like what people are doing, what is happening in US, what is happening in the European countries, how they are sustaining, then what sort of the innovations they are making to make themselves, not only themselves, but their field as a sustainable field.
Yeah.
If you cannot make our own field as a sustainable field, then we cannot create new generation.
Right.
And as a teacher, as a professional archaeologist, our main aim is okay, that is fine that we do excavations, we do research and all that. But again, our main aim to that we should be able to create a new generation.
Yes.
And if we are creating a new generation, then it is our responsibility to give them some bread and butter. So
Yes.
that's why we need to look, in a different angles and directions.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think you be it in any field, you can still get connected to archaeology, and that's how you can still try to conserve our culture and heritage. So I
Definitely,
think it is a very interlinked sort of thing where even if you are a botanist or zoologist or a chemical student, and you're still trying to do something which is indirectly conserving our culture.
definitely. See, like those who can think little bit with the emotions and help archaeology.
Yes, absolutely. That is so fantastic about it. I mean, it is like something what I really learned for the first time.
Yes.
Aniket has to say something, I guess.
Yes, I was just adding to that saying I am a wildlife lover. So for me, I'm very separated from archaeology in the truest sense, but I do have interest in the animal motifs that come up in rock paintings. Then very recently, close to Jabalpur, I had come across this fossil park, so Gogwa, which is right next to Jabalpur, and it's on the route to Bandhavgarh. And I went there, and there is a thing called petrified rock. So it is basically wood formation which have now become petrified rock layers. So I'm sure, like this, I think every field has an overlap with archaeology in some way or the other. It's just that you have to find your own niche, and when you start digging in, you'll obviously come back and connect with it somewhere, saying, these animals were used, these motifs were used, and you just connect back with it. I think.
Yes.
Definitely, definitely. That's what I said. Like those,
Hmm.
like archaeology is something which is concerned with every human. So
Yes,
whatever you do in present, somewhere it is connected with archaeology. So it is only the way you need to understand where I can connect.
absolutely.
So everyone, every common individual, every layman can connect himself or herself with archaeology.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes, absolutely. And I think we all are kind of belong to the Stone Age as well as the Metal Age, where we are still using the Stone Age tools of mortar and pestle, or we are still using the jewelries which are made of metals. So we are actually prehistoric as well, I would say.
Definitely, definitely. So that is the legacy we are carry forwarding.
Yes. Yeah, and today, whatever is happening, the pandemics and everything, it is telling us the same thing that go back to the original thing, what was happening, the way people were trying to live their life in a more natural way, the rituals or the what do you call the everyday kind of things that they used to do, and getting back to the original styles which were practiced say more than thousands of years back. And so I think that this is the time where we have to go back, dig up the history, and unlearn ourselves and learn again that what happened before, and then come back and practice it and have a better life, I would say.
This pandemic has taught us one thing: the auras and the fillers which we are carrying, they are no more required.
Yeah.
They are no more absolute necessity, basically.
Yes.
So now the time has come again to define the necessity and luxury.
Yes, yes, definitely. And I think even our all these evidences show that the prehistoric people were definitely living a very luxurious life. So when we look at their say jewelry pattern, the games they used to play, the weapons they used to use, or the dressing style, I think everywhere we see that they were not just living a very kind of a simple life or something. They had their own imaginations, they had their own luxuries, and so it was not a very I would say a very boring life. I think they had a more exciting life, and for them there was a lot of more of discoveries and things happening around that time.
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah. So that was really a wonderful session. I think we can continue for more 2 hours. And I'm so eager to actually learn more things from you. I'll personally come and meet you in Pune and get some more insights about it.
Anytime.
Yeah, so the end of the session, we always have a small rapid question and answer. So, shall we play that?
Okay.
Okay. So, the first question is your preferred destination of travel.
Italy.
Okay. Uh, the area you want to further explore or study other than in archaeology or other than archaeology.
Repeat.
Photography.
Photography. Okay. And I think it will be very much useful to you to combine and document everything that you have captured. Right. Uh, is there any book that you would recommend every one of us to read?
Just to read.
Yes,
On,
on archaeology.
okay, just read Proto History of India by M.K. Dhavlikar.
Okay. Someone from your field that you look up to?
From where? I couldn't hear you.
Some person or a celebrity from your field that you look up to?
It's my guide basically, Professor Vasant Shinde.
Okay. Any particular archaeological site that you would, try to keep visiting again and again?
Padri.
Okay. And so our last question is, what would you like to add to the message you would like to give to our audience?
Is just whatever you do it with sincerity and with emotion. That's it. If you do these two things, there is no end for anything.
Wow, absolutely. Yes,
Uh,
Aniket. Yeah.
yes. Dr. Prabhu, that was a wonderful session. We had a fun time listening to you. I think archaeology is so interconnected to all our lives, and it is just a matter of time that, we find the link in between. All we have to do is look, and I think that link always exists, and you can always connect it to whatever field you are in. If you are in fashion, you can connect it to that. If you are in cooking, you can connect it to that. You can do it in whatever field you are. And I think archaeology and anthropology, for that matter, is very tightly connected to our lives. And if we find the link, especially as tour operators, we can use it as a very good way of exploring dimensions and teaching people about how rich Indian culture and Indian heritage has been, and connect the dots for what the past has been and how the present is linked to the past. So I think it was a very wonderful session. I think I enjoyed it personally. Even though I didn't know much about it, throughout your session, I think I gained insight on how I can connect to things that I've traveled to. Like I traveled to Khajuraho, I've traveled to Gogwa, I've traveled to a couple of the places that you mentioned. And now I know how I should connect it with the mainstream tourism, how I can draw the parallels and, with just a little bit of research. I don't need to do a PhD into it, but just a little bit of research also. I think I'll have a couple of talking points on how to explain my guests to experience that landscape and those structures better. And of course, there is a difference when we travel with an expert like you on that topic. And we would personally, I think me and Deepthi both want to travel with you and experience one
Yes.
of these sites. Like Chirand, I would love to come and visit with you and see how that thing, personally, I have been always been, so I went to Bateshwar last year, and Bateshwar was this thing where I suddenly opened up this thing that we stumbled across Bateshwar. I wasn't supposed to visit Bateshwar. I'd gone to Morena for some other work, and one of the forest department employees suggested that you should go and check out Metavli and Padavli, which is just 30 kilometers away. And I went there and I was like mind blown. I was like, why does this not show up as a major tourist attraction, especially Metavali and Padavali? So I think from there, I think I've always looked at getting into understanding how archaeology plays a major role in bringing out these cultural gems that are buried in the soil. And I think I would love to travel with you and someday experience what it is like, how excavation follows, what are the stages, and how we bring about these cultures back to life. So thank you again for the session, and it was wonderful having you on board. Thank you for taking out your precious time and enlightening us with your knowledge. We hope to visit you soon and spend some time with you and learn from you in the days to come.
I'm again like thankful to all of your team, like who are in front of me to do, and maybe some people must be doing one backhand, like doing like FB and controlling all that. So I am thankful to all of you for doing this, and anyone anytime is welcome. And whatever Deccan College, myself, we can help, we will help you out.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, definitely we'll visit, and we'll visit with you to one of the sites. I think Lothal and Dholavira are always on my list. So definitely we'll plan something very soon. So thank you once again, Prabodh, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, audience. This was really a wonderful session. As we were talking about how archaeology can be a field which has amalgamation of all the different fields. So next week, we would like to tell you how tourism can be one such field where you can actually combine all your passion, all your experiences, as well as from whichever field you belong to. And tourism can be a great platform to showcase that skills in front of the people. So let us hear me and Aniket next episode and listen to our talks about what tourism is and what are our aspects or prospects to bring a real better tourism for you guys. So thank you and keep watching and keep subscribing and please our videos are already there on the YouTube channels. So keep following us. Thank you and good night. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.